There's a certain kind of neighborhood where the lawns are always trimmed and nobody ever talks about money directly. They just talk around it. New cars that appear without announcement. Additions put on the back of houses. Vacations to places they drop casually into conversation like they're nothing. My brother-in-law's neighborhood is exactly like that. Every house on that street is a performance. I've never been comfortable in places like that. I grew up in a smaller town in western Pennsylvania. The kind where the hardware store knew your name and your father's name and probably your grandfather's. My wife, Carolyn, grew up the same way. We found each other young, built something quiet, and stayed out of the way of people who needed an audience for their lives. My name is Alan. I'm 56 years old. I fix industrial HVAC systems for a living. The big commercial units. The ones in hospitals and warehouses and office buildings. I've been doing it since I was 22. I'm not a glamorous person. My hands are rough. My truck has a dent on the passenger side. I keep meaning to fix. When people ask what I do at parties, I can see them searching for the next conversation before I finish answering. My brother-in-law, Vince, is an attorney. Real estate law, mostly. He married my sister Donna 30 years ago, and from about the third year onward, he stopped trying to pretend he thought much of me. It was subtle at first. A question about my retirement plan asked with just a little too much concern. A comment about my truck in the driveway of their house. Something about whether I wanted to park it around back. Small things. But small things accumulate. Donna loves him. I have to believe that. I've never said anything to her about the way her husband treats me because I'm not willing to be the reason her marriage gets complicated. That's not a line I'll cross. So I smile. I show up to the things they invite me to. I eat the catered food and stand in the corner and watch Vince work a room, and I drive home afterward and don't say much. Carolyn always squeezes my hand on the drive back. She doesn't have to say anything. 28 years of marriage and sometimes a hand squeeze says everything that needs to be said. The Thanksgiving that changed things was 2 years ago. Donna and Vince host every year. It's been that way since their kids were small. My mother is still alive. She's 81, lives about 40 minutes from their house, and she comes every year too. My mother thinks Vince hung the moon. He's charming to her face. I've never corrected her impression. Some things aren't worth disturbing. We drove out on Wednesday night because Carolyn wanted to help Donna with the cooking in the morning. I didn't mind. I liked Donna. She and I were close growing up. Vince is the price of admission. Thanksgiving morning was fine. The kitchen smelled like sage and butter. My mother sat at the table and talked about people from the old neighborhood. The football game was on in the other room. Vince's brother and his wife came around noon. Their kids were teenagers, loud in the way teenagers are when they're performing for each other. Donna's college friends arrived. The house filled up. By the time we sat down, there were maybe 18 people at the table. Vince had set up a bar cart in the corner of the dining room, which he always does. He's very particular about hosting. He wants people to know they're in a place of abundance. That's important to him. The meal was good. The conversation was loud. I was sitting near the end of the table, next to Carolyn and across from my mother, who was telling someone about a trip she'd taken in 1987. I was listening to her, not really tracking the main conversation, when I heard my name. "Alan's the most contented man I know," Vince said. He was talking to his brother, but he said it loudly enough that several heads turned. Never needed much. That's a gift, honestly. His brother laughed a little. Polite, unsure where it was going. "I mean it," Vince said. "Some guys are just built for simplicity. No ambition weighing them down. Alan's been doing the same job since Reagan was in office. Same truck, basically. Must be peaceful." He smiled at me from down the table. The kind of smile that is designed to look generous. I looked at him for a moment. I put my fork down. "It has been," I said, and I picked up my fork again. He looked slightly disappointed. I think he wanted me to flinch, or defend myself, or laugh along in a self-deprecating way that would confirm his version of me. I didn't give him any of those. Carolyn's foot touched mine under the table. The meal moved on. My mother didn't seem to notice. Most people at the table pretended not to hear. But Vince's brother caught my eye at one point and gave me a small nod that I appreciated. After dinner, while Donna and Carolyn were doing dishes and the kids had scattered to various corners of the house, Vince held court in the living room. He was talking about a development deal he was working on. Some mixed-use property near Pittsburgh. He was describing the square footage, the investors, the projected return. His voice had that particular texture it gets when he's performing. Slightly louder, slightly slower, watching to see who's leaning in. I stepped out onto the back porch with my coffee. The backyard was dark and cold, the kind of cold that's actually refreshing when you've been inside a crowded house for hours. I stood there for a while, just breathing. I could hear Vince's voice through the glass behind me, muffled now, still going. I thought about something my father told me when I was about 25, right after I'd gotten my certification and started building my client base. He said, "The loudest man in the room is usually trying to convince himself of something." My father wasn't an educated man. He worked in a mill his whole life, but he had a way of seeing people clearly. I went back inside after a while and helped Carolyn carry things to the car. On the drive home, she asked me if I was okay. "Fine," I said. He was rude. He's always rude. I just usually ignore it better. She was quiet for a minute. Then, "You know what's funny? He has no idea." I nodded. "He genuinely has no idea," she said again, almost to herself. She was right. And that was, I don't want to say it was satisfying, because it wasn't exactly. It was more like a small cold fact sitting in my chest. Vince had built his entire impression of me from the outside, and the outside is the part I care about least. Here's what Vince didn't know. Carolyn and I had been buying properties since we were in our mid-30s, not aggressively, not with fanfare. We started with a duplex about 3 miles from our first house. One side was rented to a couple, the other to a young woman who was a nurse. We didn't talk about it at family dinners. It wasn't a secret we were keeping. It just didn't seem like anyone's business, and we'd watched enough people make the mistake of mentioning investments early, before they'd proven themselves. The duplex did well. We bought a small commercial property 7 years later. A strip of 4 units, a nail salon and a print shop and 2 other small businesses. They paid their rent reliably. We reinvested. We were careful. We were almost boring about it. By the time that Thanksgiving happened, Carolyn and I owned 9 rental units and 2 commercial properties in 3 counties. We had a property manager who handled the day-to-day. I still worked my job because I wanted to. I'm good at what I do, I like the work, and there's a satisfaction in fixing something large and broken that I've never found anywhere else. But the HVAC job stopped being financially necessary. About 8 years ago, our kids, we have 2. A son named Eddie, who's 24, and a daughter named June, who's 21. No. They've helped us do things over the years, small things, painting between tenants, yard work, that kind of thing. We've talked to them openly about the finances because we wanted them to understand how it worked. Not so they'd feel entitled to it, but so they'd understand what patient, unglamorous work looks like over time. Nobody else in the family knows. Donna suspects we're more comfortable than we let on, I think. But she's never pushed. She respects privacy more than her husband does. We don't live extravagantly. Our house is nice, but not ostentatious. We drive decent cars, but nothing that announces itself. We take good vacations, but we're not people who need to report them. Carolyn says we spent 30 years building something solid, and she's not interested in turning it into a personality. I feel the same way. The call came in February. It was Donna. Not Vince. Donna. And her voice was different, careful, the way voices get when someone has been coached on what to say. She said Vince was dealing with something. She said a real estate deal had gone wrong. The development project he'd been so loud about at Thanksgiving, as it turned out, an investor had pulled out. There were contract disputes. He'd personally guaranteed part of the financing, which I knew from experience was the kind of decision that seems manageable until it suddenly isn't. She said things were tight. She said she was embarrassed to call. She said she was embarrassed to call. She said she didn't know who else to talk to. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she was done, I asked her one question. Is Vince calling me, or are you calling me? She was quiet for a moment. He doesn't know I'm calling yet. Okay, I said. Tell him to call me when he's ready. It took him 4 days. I know because I counted without meaning to. 4 days is a long time to need something and be too proud to ask for it. When he called, his voice was different too. The performance was gone. He sounded tired, which was probably the most honest I'd ever heard him. He explained the situation more specifically than Donna had. He needed a bridge, money to cover a gap, while he renegotiated the investor terms and dealt with one of the contractors who was threatening to put a lien on the property. He mentioned a number. It was significant but not staggering, and it was well within what Carolyn and I could do without disrupting anything meaningful. He did not apologize for Thanksgiving. I didn't expect him to. He said, "I know this is a lot to ask." I said, "It is." He said, I didn't know where else to go." I let that sit for a second. Not to be cruel, just because it was true, and true things sometimes need a moment. "Let me talk to Carolyn," I told him. "I'll call you back tomorrow." Carolyn and I talked that night for about 2 hours. We sat at the kitchen table after dinner, the way we do when something needs real thinking. She made tea. I had my hands around the mug. She asked me how I felt about helping him. I told her the honest answer, which is that I didn't like Vince, but I loved Donna, and Donna's stability was tied to his. And their kids, our niece and nephew, were involved in this whether they knew it or not. It wasn't just about him. She asked if I could help without it becoming something Vince used to feel equal to me again. That was the real question, and it was a good one. We talked about structure, not just writing a check, an actual loan documented with terms, a reasonable interest rate, a repayment schedule, not punitive, genuinely fair. We would use the same lawyer we use for our property transactions. It would be a real agreement, not a family favor handed over on a handshake. Carolyn said, if he pays it back, it will have cost him something and he'll respect it. If he doesn't, we'll know something important about him and we'll never loan him anything again. I called him the next day. I told him we could help. I told him the terms. I told him we'd need it done through an attorney and that I'd cover that cost. I told him the money would be in his account within 5 business days of the signed agreement. There was a long pause. He said, I didn't know you had that kind of. I know you didn't, I said. Another pause. Longer. Alan, he said. And then he stopped. Get the paperwork signed, I said. We'll talk after. The attorney had everything drawn up within a week. Vince signed. The money transferred. I didn't make a production of it. I didn't bring it up at any family event. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't mention it to anyone. What I did do about 3 weeks after the transfer was have dinner with Vince and Donna, just the 4 of us at their house. It was Donna's idea, I think, though she said it was Vince's when she called to invite us. Dinner was quiet in a way their house never usually is. Vince had cooked, which surprised me. He's not someone who usually cooks. He made a pot roast, and it was actually good. We had wine. We talked about ordinary things, the kids, my mother's health, a road project, tearing up the highway near their house. Toward the end of the meal, Vince put his glass down and looked at me. He said, I want to say something, and I'm going to need you to let me finish before you respond. I nodded. He said, I've spent a lot of years thinking I had you figured out. I told myself a story about who you were, and I just kept telling it. I said things, over the years, at family stuff, things I said as jokes that weren't really jokes. He picked up his glass again, put it down without drinking. I was wrong about you, not just about the financial stuff, about who you are, and I'm sorry. Carolyn was very still next to me. Donna was looking at her plate. I let it sit for a moment. Then I said, I know. He looked at me, unsure. I know you were wrong, I said. I've known for a long time. I just didn't need you to know. I looked at him steadily. I appreciate you saying it. He nodded. He looked a little undone, which I imagine is not a feeling he has often. We had dessert after that. Donna had made a pecan pie. We talked more easily, the 4 of us, than we probably ever had before. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. It wasn't a movie ending. Vince didn't suddenly become someone different. But there was something different in the room. The performance was gone. He was just a tired man who had gotten himself into trouble and been helped by someone he'd underestimated, and he knew it, and I knew it, and he knew it. That's enough sometimes. He's made 3 payments on the loan so far, on time, every one. I wasn't sure he would. I'm glad he has, not for the money. The money was never really the point. I'm glad, because it means he's choosing to do the right thing when he doesn't have to, when I've already helped him and the leverage is gone and it's just about being a man of his word. That tells me something. Eddie asked me about it a few months later. He'd heard some version of it from June, who'd heard it from Carolyn. He asked me how I felt about helping someone who'd spent years being dismissive of me. I thought about it for a minute. I told him that when you spend your life building something quietly, you get to choose when to show it and when to keep it in your pocket. I told him that I'd helped Vince not because Vince deserved it, but because Donna is my sister. And I'm the kind of person who helps family even when family is difficult. I told him that I didn't need Vince's respect to feel good about myself, but that it turned out Vince's respect was the thing that finally arrived when I stopped needing it. Eddie thought about that for a minute. Was it satisfying? He asked. When he found out, I smiled a little. Ask me again in about 5 years, I said, when the loan's paid off. The pecan pie was the best part of that dinner. I've been thinking about it since. Donna said it was her grandmother's recipe, the same one she's had her whole life, the same one that's been at every Thanksgiving I can remember, actually. I just never thought to say anything about it before. I said something this time. She looked at me from across the table, just for a second, and I could see in her face that she understood what I was really saying, that I'd been paying attention all along, that I saw her, even when the room was loud and Vince was holding court and I was standing in a corner with my coffee. Some people don't need to announce themselves. They just show up, they do the work, and they let time take care of the rest. My father knew that. My wife knows it. I've tried to live it. I drove home that night through western Pennsylvania, through the small towns and the dark stretches of highway between them, past the kind of places that don't get mentioned in real estate deals or investment conversations or dinner party performances. Carolyn was in the passenger seat. The radio was low. She fell asleep about 20 minutes in, the way she sometimes does on night drives, her head tipped against the window. I drove the rest of the way in quiet. There are worse things than a quiet life. There are worse things than being underestimated by people who mistake loudness for substance. There are worse things than knowing something about yourself that nobody else knows yet. Eventually they find out. Not always, but sometimes. And when they do, all you have to do is say, I know. I've been thinking about that Thanksgiving dinner a lot lately. Not the ugly part, not Vince's voice carrying down the table, not the way a few heads turned and then quickly looked away. I've been thinking about what came after. The drive home. Carolyn's hand. The quiet. There's something that happens when you spend decades building something real and unglamorous. You stop needing to explain yourself. Not because you've given up, but because you figured out that explanation is mostly for other people's comfort, not yours. I never set out to prove anything to Vince. I didn't buy that first duplex thinking about the look on his face someday. I bought it because Carolyn and I did the math on the kitchen table and decided that patient, boring work applied consistently over time was more reliable than anything that required an audience. That's not wisdom I was born with. I learned it from watching my father work a mill job for 31 years without complaining and without pretending it was something it wasn't. He didn't perform his life. He just lived it. And when he died, he left us with a small savings account, a paid-off house, and the understanding that a man who does what he says he'll do is worth more than a man who says impressive things at dinner parties. Vince spent years deciding what kind of man I was based on my truck and my job title. That's a choice a person makes. To look at the surface of someone and call it the whole picture. I don't say that with anger anymore. I used to. But I've come around to thinking that the people who underestimate you quietly are doing you a favor. They leave you alone. They don't ask you for things until they're desperate. And when they're desperate, you get to find out what you're actually made of. What I found out is that I'm the kind of person who helps anyway. Not because Vince deserved it. He didn't particularly. But Donna is my sister, and I've loved her my whole life, and her stability was bound up in his, and their kids didn't have any say in the situation. So I helped. I structured it fairly, I documented it properly, and I didn't attach any conditions to it except that he pay it back. No apology required, no acknowledgement of anything. He apologized anyway. At that dinner, over pot roast he cooked himself. It wasn't a perfect apology and it wasn't a complete one, but it was real. I could tell because his voice was different. The performance was gone. That's the thing about cause and effect when it plays out over a long time. It's not dramatic. It doesn't arrive with music. Vince spent years treating me like a footnote, and eventually that caught up with him, not as punishment, just as consequence. The people you dismiss are often the ones who end up with something you need, and how they respond to that moment tells you everything about who they are. I'd like to think I responded well. I'd like to think Eddie and June were watching, even from a distance, and learning something about what it means to help without needing to humiliate, about what it means to be quiet and solid and still be there when it counts. Carolyn said something to me on the drive home from that dinner. She said, "You know what the best part is? You didn't have to do anything except be yourself." She was right. I just showed up the same way I always have. Did the work. Kept my word. Stayed out of the performance. Turns out that's enough. It's always been enough.